It should have been just another reckless night in Vegas, the kind you never talk about again, the kind you blame on the drinks, the music, the way the lights blur just enough to make you feel invincible. Adrian hadn't even planned to be there. He hated crowds, hated the smell of stale beer and ambition. But it was his best friend's bachelor weekend, and saying no hadn't felt like an option. So he stood by the edge of the bar at the Palomino, sipping watered-down gin, counting the hours until he could disappear quietly. And then he walked in. There are people who catch your eye, and then there are people who stop time. This man didn't smile. He scanned the room like he was looking for an exit, but his eyes landed on Adrian and stayed. It wasn't a stare that said flirt. It was a stare that said, I know exactly who you are, even if you've forgotten. Adrian didn't know how it happened. One minute he was tracing the rim of his glass, and the next, they were pressed together on the rooftop of the hotel, city lights flickering below them like they were the only real thing left in the world. The man never gave a name, just stories half true, half smoke, and lips that tasted like too many unsaid things. There was nothing soft about it. No music, no slow burn, just need, sharp and fast. The kind you don't explain. The kind you don't expect to remember. But Adrian did. The stranger had hands that held like they knew how it felt to fall. When it was over, he rolled out of bed and pulled his shirt on without looking back. Before leaving, he scribbled something on the hotel notepad and dropped it on the nightstand. No number, no signature, just 3 words. This never happened. Adrian lay still in bed long after the door clicked shut. There was no ache, no heartbreak. Only a silence that felt heavier than it should have been. He told himself it was fine, that people meet and vanish every day in cities like Vegas, that it didn't mean anything. But the truth lodged itself somewhere behind his ribs. 3 months passed. Life moved like it always does, dull, rhythmic, pretending to be full. Adrian returned home, kept his head down at work, and occasionally caught himself scanning crowds for a face he couldn't name. He told no one. Not even Sienna, his cousin, his anchor. She was too full of joy, too busy planning her wedding to a man she'd met through mutual friends. Adrian had smiled through it all, happy for her, pretending to care about centerpieces and cake tastings. Until the rehearsal dinner. The venue was a rustic estate an hour outside the city. String lights hung from oak beams, and laughter echoed through the stone halls. Sienna glowed in her emerald dress, introducing family members, gushing about her groom-to-be. Adrian stood near the fireplace, swirling his drink, tuning out. Then the door opened. The man who walked in wore a fitted black suit, clean-cut, charming, composed, but Adrian saw it instantly. The jawline, the hands, the silence behind the eyes. His heart dropped into his shoes. The room didn't know it yet, but Adrian did. That man, the stranger from Vegas, was Sienna's fiancé. He didn't even flinch when their eyes met across the room, but his grip on the champagne glass tightened. Just for a second, and that was enough. Adrian swallowed the rising bile and smiled like nothing had changed. Because in that moment, everything had. Some nights come back for you, no matter how far you run. If this story has already pulled you in, follow Heart Stories to see how it all unfolds. The secrets haven't even started yet. Adrian barely tasted the dinner. He moved through the rehearsal like a shadow, offering smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes and nods that came half a beat too late. The room was full of laughter, but it echoed like static in his ears. He couldn't stop watching the man Sienna's Julienne float effortlessly through the crowd, charming her aunts, hugging her uncles, shaking hands with a grip firm enough to earn trust. It was the same grip that had pressed Adrian against a hotel window, the same lips now smiling at a bride-to-be like nothing had ever happened. Julian didn't look nervous. He was practiced, fluent in the art of becoming exactly who people needed him to be. Adrian knew that type too well. People like that didn't break under guilt. They reshaped it until it looked like loyalty. He wondered if Julian remembered, if he thought Adrian had really forgotten. Or worse, if he believed Adrian never mattered at all. There was a moment, brief and sharp, when their paths crossed beside the dessert table. Julian placed a mini cheesecake on his plate and looked up. Their eyes locked again. Adrian expected a smirk, a hint of recognition. Instead, Julian's expression flickered, just for a second, and his hand trembled as he set the plate down. Then he looked away, turned to kiss Sienna's forehead as if that single gesture could erase everything. Later that night, Adrian stood alone on the back porch, the air thick with crickets and warm spring wind. The trees swayed under strings of fairy lights, and the stars above looked cruelly distant. He lit a cigarette, a habit he'd dropped years ago, but it felt necessary. Some truths only made sense when spoken into smoke. Behind him, footsteps crunched on gravel. Julian. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, gaze on the horizon. "I didn't know she was your cousin," he finally said. His voice was softer now, stripped of performance. Adrian didn't reply. "I thought it was one night. I didn't think it would." He trailed off, as if the rest of that sentence could be spoken without detonating the lie they were standing on. "You left a note," Adrian said. "You made sure it would never follow you." Julian turned. "It wasn't supposed to." They stood in silence. Two men in tailored suits, pretending not to be cornered by their own decisions. Adrian stared at the cigarette between his fingers, and then let it fall, ember flaring out against the wood. "She's family," he said, "and she trusts you." "I know." Julian's voice cracked then, the first real crack, but it wasn't enough. "You shouldn't marry someone while running from who you are. She makes me feel safe." "That's not the same as love." Julian looked away. The conversation ended there, not with understanding, but with exhaustion. Back inside, the crowd was raising glasses. Toasts echoed across the dining hall. Sienna stood radiant beside her fiancé, laughing at something her maid of honor said. Adrian watched from a distance, heart heavier than it should have been. He'd come to celebrate someone he loved. Instead, he was watching her walk toward a life built on denial. But something deeper itched at the base of his spine. A question he couldn't shake, because something about Julian's behavior didn't quite add up. Adrian wasn't naive. He'd seen men like Julian before, closeted, calculated, afraid. But this wasn't just fear. It was precision, erasure. Like Julian had done this before and gotten good at it. That night, back at the guest house, Adrian opened his laptop. He searched Julian's full name, mixed with old city locations, alumni pages, anything that might pull a thread loose. At first, there was nothing, a clean digital slate, until a blog post from nearly a decade ago surfaced, anonymous but archived. The writing was raw, confessional, a story about a boarding school scandal. 2 boys caught, 1 expelled, the other disappeared. Adrian read the post twice. Then again, one of the initials matched Julian's full name. He leaned back, chills crawling up his arms. Julian wasn't new to this. He'd been burying himself for years. And Adrian had just become another body under the weight. Adrian hadn't expected to sleep, and he didn't. The hours blurred into each other as he scrolled, clicked, searched, like each link might suddenly snap everything into focus. What started as suspicion grew into something heavier. Not paranoia, but pattern recognition. There were no public scandals tied to Julian, no mugshots, no forums dissecting past lovers, just silences, gaps, missing years that didn't make sense. The blog post haunted him. It didn't name names, but the timing, the city, the private school, all matched the slivers Julian had accidentally revealed that night in Vegas, back when his guard was down. The post described a boy who knew how to disappear inside a version of himself that others needed, who could mimic affection without ever letting it reach the core, who hurt people not by intention, but by erasure. The blogger ended with one sentence: "I wasn't his first secret, but I made sure I was his last." But if that were true, then Julian had either learned nothing or learned how to do it better. Adrian closed the laptop as dawn bled across the sky. He sat by the window, staring at the dirt road leading out of the estate, wondering what it would cost to leave now and pretend he never came. But his chest stayed heavy, and his legs didn't move, because he couldn't look Sienna in the eyes knowing what he knew. Not after everything she'd survived, the loss of her mother at 14, the years spent raising her younger brother like a second parent, the softness she'd fought so hard to keep in a world that asked women like her to toughen up or disappear. Sienna didn't deserve a man still haunted by the versions of himself he refused to acknowledge. By the time guests stirred for breakfast, Adrian had made a decision, but it wasn't one he liked. He wouldn't expose Julienne yet, not publicly, not loudly. This wasn't about shame, it was about patterns. And the only way to break one was to trace it all the way to its roots. At the main house, the wedding day preparations buzzed with chaotic joy. Florists scrambled with white roses. Cousins took selfies under draped chiffon. And Sienna's laughter could be heard through the kitchen walls as her friends buttoned her into a silk gown. Adrian smiled when she hugged him, hiding the war inside his chest. Julienne, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. Adrian's chance came when he overheard two groomsmen whispering near the wine cellar. Apparently, Julienne had been seen that morning speaking urgently with a man near the delivery truck, one of the crew members, someone not on the guest list. That was all Adrian needed. He slipped out the back gate and followed the gravel path toward the service lot. There, crouched beside a stack of crates, a man in a black polo shirt smoked in the shade. His face wasn't familiar. But when Adrian approached, the man straightened like he'd been caught in a lie. "I don't want trouble," the man said before Adrian even opened his mouth. Adrian's silence was answer enough. "I knew him. Years ago. Chicago." He took a long drag, exhaled. "We were close." "You were like me," Adrian said, not as a question. The man nodded slowly. "He made me feel like I mattered, then vanished. New name, new life. It's what he does. Like he's allergic to being known." Adrian's throat tightened. The man reached into his back pocket and handed over an old photo. Two young men, arms around each other, joy in their eyes. One was clearly Julienne, shorter hair, less polished, but unmistakably him. "He told me he was going to marry a woman one day, said it was the only way to keep control." Adrian turned the photo over, scribbled in fading ink to M, the only part of me I ever liked. M, the anonymous blogger, the one who'd said I made sure I was his last. But Julienne had kept going. Adrian looked at the man. "Why are you here?" The man gave a small, bitter smile. "I saw the engagement post. I came to see if he'd changed." "Has he? You're standing here, aren't you?" The wind picked up then, hugging at the edges of the photograph like it wanted to carry it away. But Adrian pocketed it. Back at the estate, Julienne still hadn't returned. Inside the bridal suite, Sienna practiced her vows in front of the mirror, radiant, nervous, alive with hope. Adrian watched her from the hallway and felt something crack open in him, something more painful than jealousy, deeper than fear. Responsibility. Julienne hadn't just lied, he'd perfected it, and Sienna was about to build a life with a man who believed love meant hiding. This time, Adrian wouldn't be the one who stayed silent. He pulled out the photo, the note from Vegas, and M's blog post printed that morning in full. He slipped them into an envelope, and on the front, he wrote in careful letters, "Read before you say yes. Tomorrow, she would stand at the altar, but tonight he would hand her the truth." The wedding day broke with the kind of cruel clarity only spring mornings could offer. Sunlight too bright, skies too perfect, as if the world itself had no idea what was about to unravel. Adrian woke before dawn, the envelope already sealed, his hands still shaking. He didn't rehearse what he'd say. Some truths weren't meant to be spoken aloud. They only needed to be placed in the right hands and trusted to speak for themselves. Before anyone else stirred, he slipped through the corridors of the estate, reached Sienna's room, and slid the envelope under her door. No note, no warning, just his name on the back, in case she needed to know where it came from. Then he waited. Not near the ceremony, not with the guests. He stood instead beneath the old oak tree near the pond, where the air felt still and old enough to hold secrets. The hours moved like water through clenched fists. Distant music, laughter, and the hollow murmur of preparations reached him faintly, like echoes from a world he no longer belonged to. Mid-morning, he heard steps behind him. Sienna stood there in her robe, barefoot on the grass, envelope clutched to her chest. Her face wasn't streaked with tears, just still, too still, the way a sea looks seconds before a storm breaks. "How long have you known?" she asked, voice like glass on stone. Adrian answered without flinching. "Since the rehearsal dinner, but I met him before that, months ago." She didn't nod, didn't look away. She opened the envelope slowly, unfolded each paper like she was peeling away the skin of a wound. The photo, the blog printout, the hotel note, the story she hadn't asked for but needed. "I thought you came here to celebrate me," she said finally. Not accusing, not broken, just betrayed. "I did," Adrian said. "That's why I couldn't let it happen." She folded everything back in perfect order, slid it into the envelope again, and held it tightly to her chest. "He told me he used to be someone else, that he'd made mistakes." I believed him. Her voice cracked. "But this isn't a mistake, it's a method." Adrian had no words to offer her comfort. There weren't any that could hold the weight of a future shattered before it began. Sienna turned, walked away, and disappeared into the house. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. What came next wasn't his to decide. Time passed. The ceremony hour approached. Guests gathered beneath a white arch wrapped in ivy and silk, unaware that the ground beneath them was already beginning to shift. Julien reappeared like nothing had happened. Tie perfect. Smile practiced. He kissed his mother's cheek, shook the officiant's hand, posed for photos like a man untouched by consequence. Adrian watched from the back row, hands clenched in his lap. Then the music started. Everyone stood, but the bride didn't appear. Seconds passed, whispers spread. Then Sienna stepped out, not in her gown, but in the same robe from that morning, hair undone, makeup untouched, envelope still in hand. She walked down the aisle, slow and steady, not toward Julien, but toward the microphone. The music stopped. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp enough to silence every breath in the room. "I want to thank everyone for being here today. It means the world to have people I love witness the most important decision of my life." She paused. "Which is why I can't go through with this." Gasps. Julien stepped forward, but she held up a hand, not angrily, just with the grace of someone who had nothing left to defend. "This man is not who he says he is, and the version he showed me was built on silence. There are things I didn't know, things I deserved to." She turned toward the crowd, eyes meeting Adrian's for the briefest second, not with gratitude, but with mourning. Then she turned back to Julien. "I love the man I thought you were, but I won't marry a ghost." Julien's face barely moved. His silence was louder than any plea could have been. The officiant quietly stepped aside. The guests sat in stunned stillness as Sienna walked back down the aisle. Slower this time. Envelope still in hand. No veil, no bouquet, no backward glance. And yet, this wasn't the ending. Because just as the murmurs began to rise again, a figure from the wedding band stood up, the keyboardist, a man in a crisp navy shirt who had kept mostly to himself all weekend. He walked toward the front, stopping beside Julien. And then he said, to no one in particular, "She wasn't the only one." The room went silent again. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an old photograph. 2 boys, 1 truth. He handed it to Sienna, then turned to Julien. "You left me with a broken version of love and made me think it was my fault. But I promised myself if I ever saw you again, I'd say it out loud." He looked at the crowd. "And now I have." Julien stared ahead, unmoving. The man turned, walked away. Adrian watched him go, This quiet stranger who had once held Julienne's heart and now helped set someone else free. Twist, then truth, then release. The wedding was over. But something else, something cleaner, quieter had just begun. The chairs were never unstacked. The flowers, arranged so carefully in white porcelain vases, wilted in the afternoon sun without ever gracing a single wedding portrait. The string quartet played one last song, an instrumental piece no one recognized, and quietly packed away their instruments. Guests left in small clusters, unsure of what to say, offering quiet nods or hushed apologies that never reached their intended destination. There were no tears, just a gentle kind of silence. The kind that settles after a storm doesn't arrive, but something else, something heavier takes its place. Adrian stayed behind long after the courtyard had emptied. He wandered the garden paths with no direction, just the weight of it all pressing through his shoes. Somewhere nearby, Julienne was likely packing, and Sienna, wherever she was facing a world no longer defined by her wedding, but by what came after her choice to end it. When he found her, it was by the pond. She sat barefoot on a stone bench, her robe replaced by a simple dress, hair tied in a loose knot, hands folded in her lap. The envelope lay beside her, edges curled now, papers slightly exposed. Like truth didn't want to stay folded anymore. She didn't look up when he approached. Didn't need to. "I'm sorry, Adrian said. "I'm not," she replied. That stopped him. "I should be wrecked right now," she continued. "But I'm not. I feel, still, it's strange, but it's real." Adrian sat beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. "You saved me," she said. "Not from him, from the version of myself that would have kept pretending I didn't see the signs." He didn't answer. Some acknowledgments don't require confirmation. Then she turned and looked at him, not with resentment, not even sadness, just clarity. "He hurt people before me. He'll do it again unless someone breaks the story." Adrian nodded slowly. "Then let this be the break." She reached for the envelope and held it out. "I don't want to carry this anymore," she said. "But someone should." He hesitated, then took it, not as evidence, not as revenge, but as a record of weight passed between survivors. Later that evening, as the estate emptied out and the final van pulled away, Adrian stood at the gate with the envelope in hand. A breeze stirred around him, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and extinguished candles. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the gravel. From behind, a quiet voice spoke. "I never thought I'd say anything." It was the keyboardist, the man from the ceremony. Adrian turned. "I didn't do it for revenge," he said. "I just needed to hear myself say it, out loud. For once." "You did more than that," Adrian replied. They stood quietly. No handshake, no names exchanged, just a shared understanding that they had both been voices in someone else's silence for too long. "Take care of her," Em said. "I will," Adrian promised. Then the man walked away, disappearing down the path where guests had left, where stories sometimes ended, but this one hadn't. In the months that followed, Adrian and Sienna rebuilt something that was quieter, more honest than before. No grand gestures, no sudden declarations. Just the steady rhythm of trust earned back in shared moments. Like the day she started volunteering at a youth shelter, or when she emailed the anonymous blogger behind that decade-old post and thanked them. As for Julienne, he left town. No announcement, no trace, just like before. Maybe that was his way. Maybe that was how he survived. But for once, someone else's survival mattered more. And in a small wooden box at the back of Adrian's bookshelf, the envelope remained. Not as a weapon, not even as a warning, but as proof that silence doesn't have to win. And some stories, no matter how hidden, deserve to be told. Even if only to say, "I lived through it, and I chose something better." Have you ever walked away from something that looked perfect because you finally saw the truth beneath it? Tell us below. Your story might help someone else find the strength to do the same. If this story moved you, follow Heart Stories for more real, raw, and powerful journeys like this one. Because the truth when spoken can heal more than silence ever could.